Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Every Week English. This is your boy, Josh Golson. Please make sure to share with your friends. And if you would like a lesson, reach out to me at everyweekenglish@outlook.com. If you want to pick up one of my books, right, just go to Amazon, type in J.S. Golson. Even on Google, you can type that in and find me. Today, we will talk all things politeness, manners, and etiquette. The grammar for today is modals of obligation and prohibition, and the vocab today is phone language. Likewise, our idioms are look before you leap, so think of the risks before you do something. So just, be aware of your surroundings before acting. On thin ice, which is in quite a risky situation, right? So you want to look before you leap, otherwise you could be on thin ice, which is when you could get in trouble. And the last one is to play devil's advocate. And playing devil's advocate is one of my favorite things. The history of this is that in the Catholic Church, whenever they make somebody a saint, they have to have, an advocate is a lawyer. So they have to have a lawyer for the devil, basically saying all of the reasons why that person cannot be a saint. And in real life, a devil's advocate is somebody who always takes the opposite side in an argument. So if you say, I like hamburgers, I'll say, no, you don't like hamburgers. You like fried potatoes. And then I will make an argument about why you like fried potatoes more than why you like hamburgers. And it's also known as a contrarian. Contrary means the opposite of something. So you're always saying or going against whatever is stated. So again, that's look before you leap, on thin ice, and play devil's advocate. To hop into the vocabulary of phone language, we've got to dial, right, which means simply to put in a number, to text or message someone. I think everybody knows that. To hang up means to end a phone call. A ringtone is when you call somebody and there's music playing, so you know you have a call. You call back to somebody if you missed the call. You leave a message on voicemail if it's possible. I know that voicemail has sort of died in popularity, so they're not really used anymore, or it isn't used anymore. But to leave a message is it sits there and then you can listen back to it on your phone. Then there is engaged, which has several different meanings. To get engaged means to have somebody propose to you, to say, will you marry me? To be engaged means that you have a fiance, or it means that you are busy. And if the line is busy or if the line is engaged, it means you can't talk to the other person at that moment. Then you have swiping, right? So think of when you're looking through the photos on your phone and you're going left, you're going right, that is always swiping. And it's swiping motion is going from left to right, or right to left, or up to down, down to up. If your phone goes off, right, you conjugate. So in the past, it's your phone went off in the middle of a meeting. It's very embarrassing. To be put on hold. So quite often when you call a business, especially in the States, they will automatically put you on hold. And that can be either from 5 minutes to like an hour. Sometimes it's really, really ridiculous. Then to be cut off, normally it's in the middle of a conversation when it's not your choice to hang up. And the other person didn't hang up either. It's just you lost cell phone service or cell phone signal. And so the call couldn't keep going through. And that is the phone language. Now on to the grammar of obligation and prohibition. We have a couple of modals of obligation. We have have to or must plus the infinitive. The opposite, the negatives, are don't have to, mustn't. Likewise, very similar to those is we have I have got to, which forms into slang as I've gotta or gots to do something. I gots to do something. It means the same thing as I have got to, plus the infinitive. And typically, if you have to do something, it is an obligation from outside being imposed on you. So, like, the trash is full, so I have to take out the trash. You know, I didn't choose to do that. It's the trash made me take it out, right? Or if your parents tell you go wash the car, right, then you have to wash the car, right? Or your boss tells you to stay late and work overtime, then you have to stay late. You have to work overtime. And then must is a lot more strict. That is typically an obligation from inside of you, right? It is a duty, D-U-T-Y, something that you must do because you feel morally obligated to do it. So, for example, after the podcast, I must teach a couple of classes, right? Likewise, I also have to because my boss is expecting me to be there, my students are expecting me to be there, but I hold myself to a standard or a principle that I must be there. Likewise, it is used for laws. A lot of people say you must pay your taxes, right? That sort of thing, or you must wear your seatbelt. We have the next one is should or shouldn't plus the infinitive. And this one, it's not so much as an obligation, but it is an opinion about morals normally. So I always like to ask students, like, what should everyone do before they graduate university or graduate school? And some students say everyone should learn English. I like to say that everyone should learn financial literacy, right? And another thing I always ask is, like, how old should a kid be before they get a smartphone? And it's interesting to hear the responses because you have parents saying as soon as first grade, so as soon as they go to school without you, they get a smartphone, right? And to me, that is really crazy because that's like 7 or 8 years old. Whereas I think like a kid shouldn't get a smartphone until they're in high school or even university. I think the longer without it, the smarter you're going to be because you will be forced. You will have to do other things to use up your time. So you will have to read books or you will have to study. You can't just stare at the smartphone. Likewise, with should is ought to, or you can do the slang oughta. And oughta, or ought to, it's not used as much as should. Should is a lot more common. I would say in British English, they do use ought to. And along with that, it's also very strict. Like in the Bible, you have the 10 Commandments. You ought to not murder, right? Or thou shalt. Shalt is another good one. Yeah, otherwise, those are the modals of obligation. They all tend to be followed by the infinitive verb. Right? They're quite good ones. And then we'll go on to take a look at a couple manners questions and to read a little bit about the Penn State Guide to American Manners for foreigners who are coming to Pennsylvania, because it is quite funny, um, or even sort of silly that they have to explain these basic things of culture. But it makes sense because you go to a different country, they have different manners, different politeness. Um, so going through some of these questions, the first one, it's much like the agree, disagree, like when people take selfies all the time and post them online. I think it's very silly, and I often like to people watch and make observations. And it's always funny. I try to get in, like if somebody's taking a photo with you in it, right? You might as well make some funny face, especially when you don't know the other person, right? Especially when that person is a stranger. Um, which this is, we have a term for this. It's called photo bombing, right? The next one, should people talk loudly on their phones in public transport? No, and it's quite interesting. In America, people often will do this, and like phone culture is a really big thing over there. You turn the public space into your own private meeting room. Whereas in places like Japan, on public transport, everybody is silent. Um, and typically, yeah, even when it's really, really crowded, it's silent. Now, the next one, put their phones on the table in front of them at a restaurant, in a cafe, or in your house. This has become quite common, and it does sort of bug me, but as long as you're not staring at your phone the whole time, on social media or something like that, I think that's no problem. But they should always have their phones on silent, that sort of thing. Same with like, don't, if you go to a movie theater or a cinema or an opera or a play or anything like that, um, turn off your phone, right? We're there to get off of electronics for a little bit, so don't ruin it for the rest of us, right? Um, don't distract from what we're taking a look at. And likewise, don't text while you're doing other things, because you can be quite distracted, especially texting while driving. It's one of those biggest reasons for crashes in the United States, especially cars hitting each other. Um, I think when you're walking, like it's okay, just pay attention. Um, I've been guilty of that where I have run into a pole or something because I was texting, didn't pay attention. Um, and then to post photos of babies and small children, it's very strange. I think, like for the most part, I'm quite a private individual, and you can look me up on Facebook, contact you, LinkedIn, all the social media stuff, and I I just don't use them really. I started to use Instagram a little bit, although it is blocked in Russia, um, so I don't post on it so much. Um, but I can understand that feeling of like, oh, I got to take a picture, I got to post it, I got to get likes, you know, for that small hit of dopamine. But like, they're your babies. I don't think anybody else is going to care about them, unless they're like really funny looking or something. You got a funny looking kid. Um, the worst one, and this happens sometimes on the Moscow metro, is to listen to music without headphones. And I think this also goes on in the States, and it's terrible. Um, there was a reason why headphones or earbuds were invented, right? It's just put them on, for your private pleasure so that the rest of us don't have to be bothered by you. Although it does create for an atomized society where everybody is in their own bubble, and and nobody is talking to each other. Like you don't meet your neighbors anymore. You don't talk to anybody on the metro or at the gym or in these public places, right? Everybody's in their own zone, um, which it's sort of comforting, and we've gotten used to it. On one hand, on the other hand, like it's really bad. We humans crave community, right, and society. And I think if you don't have those things, right, you're gonna go a little haywire, we say, or a little crazy. Um, that's why I do things like play Warhammer. I'm interacting with other people in real life, or I go to church, and again, learning things and talking to people in real life. Um, Now the foodies taking photos of everything they eat, um, that always bothered me. But again, I'm quite guilty of that because I started doing it also. Um, it's just to show off, and we've all become a little bit, narcissistic or egotistical, and saying, "Hey, look at me, my life is so much better than yours," but you don't post the bad stuff, right? And so, because of social media, recently we've had a warped sense of reality or a strange sense of reality because we're only seeing the good things, not the bad things. Um, and then, like posting a message on your birthday, but never getting in touch during the rest of the year. I think that's quite common for my poker night buddies. Um, and I always laugh with the students. What they do is they send HBD, right? So one text, HBD, which stands for happy birthday, right? It's like, all right, but we don't talk any other time really. Versus in Eastern European, Russian society, at least you call the other person on their birthday. And so even like your cousins or people you haven't talked to in a while will call you and they'll actually have a conversation, see how you're doing, and congratulate you, say like, oh, I wish you happiness, health, good fortune, and all the rest of it. Um, there's a good word, it's trite. Trite means something that has been done over and over again. It's like a cliche. Uh, and so you start to think people aren't so genuine or aren't so sincere because it's very easy to formulate those things. You know, Счастливый, happiness, fortune, good health, здоровье тоже, things like that. Yeah, that is a little bit annoying. Um, and otherwise, we'll take a look at greeting people. So typically in the States, we shake hands with everybody, right? No matter who they are, young, old. Um, if they're strangers, you shake hands with them, that sort of thing. It's very good manners too. And I tell my students, like, there's history behind everything that we do. And we shake hands to show the other person that we aren't armed, right? That we're not holding a knife or anything like that, that we're not going to, hurt them, right? And to take the measure of the other person. Um, we don't really kiss on cheeks. Although this is one, I think we should do it as Christians because it is called Christ's greeting, and in Georgia, I noticed that the native Georgians, they still greet each other a lot by kissing on both cheeks. Um, and in church, they also do that to strangers, right? It was pretty cool. Now, to use your husband or wife's parents' first names, I think that depends on the family. We're a lot less formal nowadays, a lot more informal. Like I call my parents-in-law, I just say, mama and papa, right? Ili mamichka and papichka, right? Um, which is diminutive, right? For those. And then to go on a bit, we'll take a look at the guide to American manners. So, of course, in the States, alcohol and smoking is illegal under the age of 21. Smoking was a very recent thing they passed. It used to be 18 when I was growing up. And it's also a crime to give somebody under 21 alcohol. Likewise, you can't smoke in public, right? It's very, very different from Europe and Asia. Here you can only smoke in smoking areas where they say like, hey, you can smoke here. And of course, for drugs, most drugs are still illegal in most states, unless you go to cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, Portland, Los Angeles, Seattle, where the cops just don't care. And that's primarily because the cities are run by Democrats. And, you know, they had calls to defund the police. And so the police don't really want to put their neck out to people who don't care about them. And it's very interesting to look at YouTube videos about these cities where, you know, every drug is legal. And then in most states now, maybe half, it's legal to smoke the devil's lettuce or marijuana. Okay. Now, as for animals and pets, Americans tend to see that pets are part of the family, and so they call them like their children. I really don't like that because they're not, right? They're not children, right? And I always like to show a distinction between words because words actually do matter. And so we've seen in Europe and all around the world in the West is cat ladies, right? And so it's ladies who have grown old and they never had a family except for cats. And then they die and nothing's left of them, right? And they let all of their ancestors down. And I like it says here, for better or worse, Americans spend a lot of time and money on pets. Likewise, there are animal protection laws to prevent animal cruelty, and the most popular pets in the US are dogs, cats, hamsters, and fish. Yeah, typically goldfish. Likewise, I would say dogs are more popular in the States because we have bigger yards, whereas in countries which have apartments, it tends to be cats. And a lot of students I have, they tend to have cats as pets. And then going on to like classroom etiquette. So Western society was built on Greek principles, Greek philosophy, and then Christian principles, Christian philosophy. And so we have what's called the Socratic method. And the Socratic method is when a bunch of students sit around in a circle and they ask and answer questions that the teacher gives them. And for the most part, participation is highly encouraged and will affect your grade. You know, whenever I teach students, I always look around, I see who's not participating, and I get them to participate. Because that's what you're there for, learning English, is to practice your speaking, your pronunciation, how to formulate sentences, everything like that. And typically students remain seated unless a professor calls on your name, but even then, typically students remain seated. Attendance is another thing. So typically in the States, you have to show up to every single class, whereas I know in Europe, in some Asian countries, you can just take the test, pass the test, and that's it, right? Versus in the States, you must show up to most classes, and then you must pass the test, right? You know, this semester, sort of bothering me, I have a student who showed up for maybe one class and then stopped showing up, but she still expects me to grade her essays and stuff. And it's like, I don't even know who this person is. I just have their email address. And so I don't feel any obligation towards that student, right? Um, and so in my classes, attendance is required. Typically, when teaching adults, they have a self-obligation because they are paying for the classes to show up and get better at English. Also, we put an emphasis on understanding material, not just memorizing. Um, and likewise, eating is not so um, expected in classrooms, and normally it's banned, right? Normally, professors will say no food or water in here. So, but quite often, drinking is okay, right? Um, what's interesting is Penn State, they talk about dating etiquette. So when a person says no, he or she means no. Um, so always no means no is what's repeated. And what's very funny here is it says if a woman is dressed immodestly, it is not an invitation for men, and the not is in all caps. Um, Maybe at Penn State they get a lot of like Muslim students, for example, who might not understand this, where they come from a society where all the women are dressed very modestly, meaning they're covered up, right? Um, and it's always funny whenever I talk to students who are like cultural subjectivists, where they say like, you know, uh, for example, Lithuanian culture is the same as Latvian culture. Latvian culture is the same as Polish culture, and so on. And I say, okay, how would you? And normally it's women. And I say, how would you like to live in, Saudi Arabia? And then they understand that it's very different. Um, Likewise, in the States, we're very informal, so we dress very casually. And so we're okay just literally wearing whatever. Um, and again, it's funny, they repeat that um, women may dress immodestly, but it is not an invitation for men. Quite funny, I think. Then goes on to driving laws and etiquette. So in the States, we only honk when we're angry. Although in other cultures, they honk to say thank you or to say, yeah, it's okay. It's illegal to text and drive, and you must wear your seatbelts, that sort of thing. Um, and Americans eat with their mouths closed, yeah, which we would think most polite societies they do this. Um, Likewise, if you're burping or sneezing or farting, right, don't do that. And then Americans like to eat sweet things, heavy food, that sort of thing, and casual hospitality. So if you're invited over to a house in the States, either they'll say BYOB, right, which means bring your own booze or bring your own alcohol, or they'll say like, hey, bring some food. And then it turns into what's called a potluck. Um, and we always tend to value convenience over everything else. So you don't always have to bring a gift, but it's quite a nice thing when you do. And typically, it would be like a bottle of wine, for example, or a case of beers, that sort of thing, to share with the homeowner. Um, yeah, likewise, we can wear shoes in the house. It's quite common. That's typically because we don't care so much about the dust, right, and the dirt in the roads. You wipe off your shoes before going into a home, and then you can just walk around freely. Last but not least is eye contact. So when you're talking to somebody, it's seen as impolite if you do not make eye contact, or it means you're untrustworthy. But in public, it's very polite to avoid making eye contact with somebody in public. What's quite interesting is that in the British subway, they made it illegal to stare at people, right? Which is quite crazy. Um, Otherwise, yeah, that'll be it for manners and politeness. Um, Again, don't forget your idioms, being look before you leap, on thin ice, and to play devil's advocate. Highly recommend playing devil's advocate. It's always fun, especially like if you're debating something. It's really good. Um, don't forget to keep learning your English out there. Uh, Again, if you would like to share this, please feel free. And if you like a lesson, hit me up. All right, I'm always here. My email is everyweekenglish@outlook.com. Otherwise, this was Josh Golson, and I will see you guys next time. Have a good one.